everyone. I am Susan Haworth, step-parent counselor and coach. And today we're going to dive into narcissism, specifically how we can relate to people with narcissistic tendencies. I'm joined by Steven Unruh. Steven is a psychotherapist and a divorce mediator who has expertise in this field. And he specializes in working with couples and helping them navigate divorce when one of them has a personality disorder. Whew, that's a lot. With graduate degrees in psychology and divinity and over 30 years of experience, he is well equipped to help his clients. So welcome, Steven, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Susan. It's great to be here, and it's lovely to see you.
Thank you. How did you do it? How did you get into this field or the specialty of working with people with personality disorders?
You know, my early training was actually in psychoanalysis, and I had a great analyst who worked with personality disorders. So even as an intern many moons ago, she would refer to me some really difficult cases. And that just gave me a fascination in trying to understand personality disorders. And especially one of my areas of specialty was marriage counseling before I became a divorce mediator. And really trying to understand what's happening in a relationship. And so that recognizing when someone's bipolar or narcissistic or has other, maybe sociopathic tendencies or paranoia, that clearly significantly impacts a relationship. And so that has always been a fascination with me.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you do what you do, because it's not for the faint-hearted, I'm sure. So narcissism is one of the most widely Googled terms in the US. We're just fascinated with it. And, what I think is using pathologizing language has become like a national pastime. We label people narcissistic and everything else.
Right.
Why are we so obsessed with narcissism?
Very interesting. That's a great question. We are very curious. I like the word obsessed with narcissism. I think that it may be similar to when years and years children would have developmental issues. We didn't know what was wrong. Why are you screaming? You're 8 years old and we're in public. And suddenly we had a diagnosis for some of the developmental issues that children have. Well, now we have a diagnosis for people that are very self-centered, that say horrible things to their children, that have these maybe strange ideas of grandiosity. A lot of times a narcissist thinks they're above the law, and they create their own rules, and they impose those rules on other people. And that's incredibly destructive if you're married to someone like that. So I think people are trying to understand. That's the one thing. They're confused. Is it me? Is it her? Is it him? Who is the crazy person here? And so sometimes having a label puts pieces together for people that have been really disoriented in relationships.
Mm. And, I know some people believe we have a narcissistic, an epidemic of narcissism. I think there's a book with that title. So, I mean, is that something that you think as well, that more people are have that condition or that tendency?
I don't think so. I think that it's always been here. It's always been around. I think maybe what's interesting is that we're actually acknowledging that women can have that disorder also. And so even if we described, I know generally we do talk about men being narcissistic, but I think as we have more information, we're recognizing that it is in all areas of our population. I don't think it's so much of an epidemic, but that does relate to, I think, people over-diagnosing, instantly saying, oh, you're such a narcissist. And maybe the other individual's like, I actually thought that was the right thing to do. I didn't think I was doing anything harmful for the family. So we are jumping around and using that term, I think, at times inappropriately.
Yeah, I do too. I wish I had $1 for every time I heard someone say, "Oh, she's a narcissist. He's a narcissist."
Yes.
I'd be a rich woman.
Yeah.
So, what do you think the dangers are then in using that kind of language?
I think that one of the dangers is that by instantly labeling people, we put them in a box and we end up losing our objectivity. We end up maybe even becoming the narcissist because we have a label and we put that on the individual, and everything they do is interpreted that way, which in a way maybe begins to excuse our behavior and our reactions, and we rage and we yell and we call them names. Well, wait a minute, that behavior is inappropriate.
Mm.
So the danger is in labeling someone that we don't get to see them as a whole person, and we don't get to recognize our part in the dynamic of the relationship. When we label someone, we suddenly become the good person and they're the bad person.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's just, I mean, we lose our humility. That is for sure.
Right. That's a great phrase. We lose our humility. That's very good, Susan. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. So, as a clinician, you're in the business. How do you diagnose somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder? What do clinicians use to put
Great.
that diagnosis?
Yeah, and there actually is the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual you're familiar with, actually has categories, 9 categories. And you only have to have, I think, 6, maybe there's 10, 6 out of 10. So what I look for is when someone's a victim and they talk about being a victim and they say, oh, it's not my fault, and I didn't know what else to do. What could I have possibly done? She does this to me all the time. So when I listen to that language, that someone is presenting themselves as if they're always the bad guy and they're the victim, instantly I begin to think, oh, that's pretty interesting. Because most people don't do that. Most people don't talk like that. But that tends to be language of a narcissist, where they always feel impinged upon when actually they could be the victimizer. They're the ones who's the bully. They're the ones maybe that's degrading and insulting, but they have excuses all the time. So there's a few characteristics that I look for, that being one of them, because then you can't get them to acknowledge their part. So related to that would be someone who doesn't take responsibility for their actions. That's huge. That is a very significant indication that someone could either have tendencies or be moving in that direction of being narcissistic when they don't genuinely apologize. You might have people with anger issues. There's stuff from the past they haven't dealt with. But if they can come back, now it's harmful. You can't just keep coming back and screaming and yelling and saying, I'm sorry. But if someone has actual empathy and they come back and they can look at themselves, that's called an observing ego. They can actually recognize, I really hurt you. I really caused my child to cry. That was my fault. Well, if somebody has that kind of genuine empathy, they're probably not a narcissist. They probably have some other issues, but a narcissist doesn't have that empathy. They're like, well, he deserved it. Well, you deserved it. Well, they're an idiot. And so they also don't have any empathy. And even more extreme cases, they create their own rules. They live in a world and you have to live in that world, and they impinge that world and that worldview and the role that you have in my relationship, that's the role you're going to have, and this is the role I'm going to have. And they force people into that grouping, into that world. That would be someone who's a narcissist.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can see there's a difference between a full-blown narcissist, you know, according to the DSM, and people with narcissistic tendencies.
Right.
And that must be a continuum, right?
It is. Yep, you're right. A good way to look at that is maybe the continuum of someone who might be very suspicious and they don't trust a lot of people. They don't have a lot of friends, but and they kind of tell their kids, well, just got to watch your back. Well, if they start thinking that everybody in the room is talking about them, if they start thinking that the noise outside was intentional to disturb their sleep, now we've moved into paranoia. So there is kind of that continuum that at some point, when you have 6 of these characteristics, you are now probably in a personality disorder. It becomes more complicated. But you're right. All of us can have a bad day, and all of us can make very selfish decisions.
Right.
So there are people that do that a little bit more often, and that would be someone who has some tendencies. But I wouldn't run around diagnosing everyone a narcissist.
Yeah, yeah. And what is the prognosis for someone who has that personality disorder?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. It's not good. Yeah, sadly, it's not good. You need a very good clinician. You need a therapist that understands that disorder and that is kind of bold enough to gently confront it. You just can't come on like a bulldog with someone who's a narcissist because they'll flee. They'll never come back. You have to slowly help them look at themselves. But do you see what that's doing to your family? Can you understand how she feels? And if they can actually take in slowly that other person's perspective, if you can work with them in a way that starts off gently, but then becomes a little bit more confrontive, they have to eventually acknowledge that they're hurting people. And then there's hope. But without that acknowledgement, if they can't first come to that recognition, there's the statistics aren't great. I'll give you an illustration. A family that the dad didn't like dogs. Kids wanted a dog so badly. For years, they wanted a dog. Nope, we're not having them in this house. I hate dogs. I don't want the hair. I don't want the smell. Well, now they're getting to be teenagers. And if you remember what a mall is, there was a mall. They went to a mall and there was a dog clinic. And the dad announced in front of the other kids and his wife, kids, it's Christmas, go pick out a dog. And of course, they were screaming and happy. Dad was the greatest guy on earth. He was so amazing. He won, all the stars. And his wife was like, you didn't allow me to be a part of that decision. You didn't even communicate, this is shocking. And you get all the glory now. You get to be the bad guy when really you've been the jerk. You've been the person that's withheld these kids, but now you're amazing and I look like an idiot. That would be a very narcissistic decision on that part. And, over a lot of work, they were actually be able to begin to see another person's perspective. And that's key if they're going to change.
Yeah, that's a great story, Steven. I think we all have to be careful with our language.
Right.
I mean, that's in lots of ways. Yeah. But specifically with labeling people, because there are, many of us are self-absorbed, and from time to time, some of us are self-absorbed a lot, but that doesn't make us a narcissist.
Right.
And I have a story that I wanted to share with you.
Good.
It's kind of funny, and it is a true story. We had a house guest several years ago, uninvited house guest. He needed. I'm already tipping the scales, right? He needed a place to stay for a few days, which turned into a week. And he told me while he was here and taking up space, that he was diagnosed with narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder. And what he said with some pride was that he was the most extreme that his therapist had ever seen. And I thought, that's perfect.
So
you
there was,
know?
yes, there was grandiosity even in his diagnosis.
Exactly. And I can't make this up. This is actually what he said. So that was my more recent experience with someone who was actually diagnosed.
That was like a train coming. That wasn't just a red flag.
Yeah, exactly. So I have several questions for you about this. First of all, how do we deal with somebody who is maybe not a full-blown, DSM diagnosed narcissist, but has a lot of tendencies in that direction? How can we have a relationship with them, or can we?
Well, if they just have tendencies, I think you can. I think there's a lot more opportunity. There's a lot more bandwidth to work with someone who maybe just has some tendencies. First of all, you have to stop arguing. You can't convince them of anything. And just as we can't convince people of most anything, people have to come to that knowledge. And so you've probably already tried therapy, you've cried, you've begged, you've said all kinds of things to help them understand. So you have to get out of that argument and to quit that kind of insanity. And instead, you just state your case. It would be that when they make some kind of outrageous claim that you did this to them and you did it intentionally, you embarrassed me in front of all my friends. And she knows she didn't. She knows that he actually made this faux pas and really embarrassed himself. You can make a statement, so you get to represent yourself without trying to always challenge them and argue with them. You can still represent yourself. So that's important. And you have to say things like, I know that's your perspective, and I completely disagree. I don't see it that way, but I'm not going to argue with you. Well, but you did this and you did that, and then this happened and that happened. I understand that's what you think happened. I don't believe that, and I disagree with you. And I'm not taking responsibility for you being embarrassed. That was really not something I did. So there has to be these statements where you just simply say, I'm not going to continue this conversation. I've already told you where I stand. Now, there could be an instance where, maybe someone is berating the children. You have a right to step in, even in that moment, and say, I'm sorry, Johnny, your dad should never have called you that. That's so inappropriate. I'm really sorry. This should never have happened. And of course, later, the husband might be infuriated and take you aside and say, how dare you? You embarrassed me, and da-da-da. Rather than arguing, you just simply say, and I will do it again. Every time you humiliate our children, I will intervene. I will intervene. I will protect them. And if you become embarrassed, that's your problem. So again, you're not arguing and saying, look what you've done, and this is so horrible, and I can't even believe you can't see it. Because if they can't, they can't. In that moment, hopefully maybe later on, they can kind of come to some recognition as to what they did. But again, you're kind of standing your ground and you're saying, this will be my action. So there's a couple things. By not arguing, by stating what you believe reality to be, you're then thirdly, you're saying, and here's going to be my action. I will leave. I will call your mother, no, or your brother. You're right, but I'm going to leave. I'm not going to enter into this disagreement, or I will challenge you, even if it's publicly. I will stop this. So you have an action, and they won't like it. They'll argue with it, and you say, "I've already told you what I'm going to do. We don't need to discuss this anymore."
I think, you and I are both in the business of helping people and not, being realistic with people that you can't change someone else.
Right.
And so I try to focus on what you can do for yourself. And so here's my question for you, Steven, is how can we prevent ourselves from becoming the narcissist? Because we could get into feeling like victims of this other person.
Oh, right. Yes.
And so what can we do to prevent leaning in that direction?
It takes getting professional help to help you become objective about yourself. That would be key. A therapist that could be objective with you. And then it would be through maybe your own evaluation, sitting down and thinking through, gosh, am I playing the victim? Am I always feeling sorry for myself? What else can I do in this situation so that I feel stronger and I feel empowered? Because that's so key when someone is in a narcissistic relationship. You want to empower them. You want to pull them out of that chaos.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's being able to be honest with yourself and somebody else who can be objective. Now, for me, that's my sister. You know, your friends might be like the bartender. Oh, you got to be kidding me! I can't believe he or she did that. You know, that's not helpful. My sister is straight as an arrow. She'll go, "You're crazy. You got to be kidding me." You know, so I can always go to her and check things out, and she will tell me the truth, and that's really helpful. And so
Yeah,
I think it's important to have someone who doesn't always take your side.
Yeah, and it's important not to take your own side sometimes.
Right, right.
Right.
Yes, exactly. To step back and to go, was there some truth into what she said? What part of it can I really hold on to and think about? I remember my wife worked with a nonprofit, and it was dealing a lot with women who were homeless. And she came home one time. The mother had already had her kids taken away. They were ready for an adoption, and she changed everything and threw everybody off and decided to keep the child. Well, sure enough, months later, we didn't know this, but she lost that child too. But when my wife came home, she said she was so upset. She said, "You can't believe it. So and so decided to blow up the whole process and keep the child."
Mm.
Well, I did not have a very therapeutic response, and I said, "Oh, who's surprised?" Well, what ensued were lots of accusations. And I stopped and I thought, some of them are true. So I'd had a nap, so that helped, you know, when you're not tired.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I was able to apologize and say, oh my gosh, you're right. I was completely insensitive as to how that impacted you and how that affected you because you're so upset.
Yeah.
But it's not true that I'm a jerk or, you know, a bad counselor.
Yeah.
Other things that were said. So, you know, if you can find a way to be objective and find the truth in maybe some of those accusations, to look at ourselves honestly.
Yeah. I think that's where the growth happens when you are in a tough relationship, whether it's with an ex or a friend, is to look at your responsibility in that.
Right.
And how you're contributing to the chaos or the contention.
Yes.
You know, I am on a mission to untangle the relationship between biological mothers and stepmothers.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that sometimes it's there on both ends. It's like we're following central casting, and we're at each other, and we're safe. You know, it's a safe person to blame.
Yeah. Yes.
When we sometimes let our partners off the hook for their responsibility in that contentious relationship.
Right.
So it's, you know, we have to look at the man or the woman in the mirror.
Yep, that's right.
Right. And stop focusing on how the other person is not right.
Yes.
Is not healthy, and look at really focus on ourselves.
Yeah. I think that's so true, Susan. That's excellent advice. You're right. It's being able to stop always accusing somebody else, but to step back and go, yeah, I probably didn't need to say that. Yeah, you know, I threw the keys at him rather than handing him. Yeah, you know what? I was part of that reaction on his part. Yeah. And so it's being able to look at our own anger and our own issues that this other person brings out of us.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Our disappointment,
Yeah.
all of that really factors in. And if I could lobby for people stopping to not labeling people
Right.
as much, because I don't think it's helpful.
Right. Right. I don't. Because
Yeah.
again, you're right, it keeps us from being able to look at our responsibility and our reactions. We're putting them in a box, and so we're misreading things. We're interpreting everything through that lens when that's not the case.
Yeah, yeah. So I am curious, what is the toughest personality disorder for you to deal with in your divorce mediation practice?
Yes, the toughest personality would be actually a borderline personality.
Yeah.
Because I don't know where the term borderline came from, because it should really just be called the bucket personality, because a borderline has a lot of narcissism. They're bipolar, they're unpredictable, but they're vengeful. And that's a key characteristic of someone who's a borderline. They're always out to attack and to get back at people. They love revenge. That's all they think about. They want power, and they want to use that power to punish people, to get back at people. And in divorce, they're very difficult to deal with because they're so unreasonable. And I'll say, but this is the law, and this is going to be split. Or you will be divorced. You can do it the hard way or a better way. You can go to court and spend a lot of money, or you can mediate. And I compare the two with like swimming. Mediation is probably being caught in a riptide. It's kind of scary. But I'm the coach and the educator, and I'm telling you, no, do this, do this, do this, swim this way, and okay, and then you're on the shore. You're going to be safe. Going to court's a tsunami. It just wipes people out. It's very destructive. And so the difficulty with a borderline is keeping them in mediation, because they think that if they go to court, the judge and the attorney will believe them and they'll get everything they want. And that's just not the case.
Yeah. And so do they tend to jump from mediator to mediator the way some people do from therapist to therapist to find the one who will agree with them?
No, they don't. Yeah. If I have a very high success rate of keeping some difficult people in mediation.
Great.
If somebody leaves, it's because they've actually gotten some very bad advice from an attorney. An attorney once told this doctor that she would get full custody. I said,
yeah,
you're wrong.
Yeah.
He's an engineer. He's not a drug addict. He's not on the streets. And he's raised your other two kids, by the way. You're not going to get full custody just because, okay, he pushed you. That was wrong. He shouldn't have done that. But, he's not going to lose custody because he pushed you. And so they actually jump from mediation to litigation, usually, if they leave. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up an interesting point about attorneys. Now, some family lawyers are my best friends, so I don't want to throw them under the bus. But
right. Same here.
But it's true that they often are not realistic with their clients.
Yeah.
And they tell them, "Oh, you got this one." There's no way that famous last words. There's no way the judge will side. And they also feed words, say this, do this, and it's not very helpful at times.
Right. And so, no, you and I both have attorneys who are friends or even in our family, and I have so many that I refer to and respect. But there are those who will feed off of a person's fear, who will exaggerate that fear and say, oh, you've got to be kidding. Well, he's going to do this or that, and you better, so that's unfortunate. And so sometimes people are exploited. It would be dangerous if your attorney was a narcissist. Because now they're exploiting you.
Oh my gosh, the landmines are everywhere, aren't they, Steven? Yeah. So what else, first of all, what did I neglect to ask you that I should have about narcissism or any other personality disorders? Anything that you think of?
Yeah, they were good questions. I think the key is recognizing that if this person is a narcissist and you've gone to therapy and you've tried to explain yourself, you have to stop explaining yourself and you have to have consequences. And so that's the only thing in a way that speaks to a narcissist. So I didn't mention that. And so it would be having consequences. Now, I did talk about the illustration of someone who said, if you do this, I'm going to do this. Here's my action. See, that's a consequence. So when you finally say, our marriage is over, I'm ending our marriage. We've ended our marriage. Your behavior, my reactions together, we have created an environment where this is no longer feasible. My health, my thinking, my spiritual life, all of it is being impacted by this marriage, and I'm leaving this marriage.
And that's when they get in touch with you.
Right, right. Yeah. And so there has to be consequences.
Yeah, yeah. And so when they get in touch with you, how should they do that? This is your time to plug yourself.
Okay. The easiest thing is to call. They can call my office line. It's actually my cell phone, so they'll either get a voicemail or they'll get me. On my website, it's very easy to set up an appointment. So probably the easiest way is to go to my website, stevenunruh.com, stevenunruh.com. You can set up an appointment. It's a half-hour free consultation, and that's the beginning. But then I also work to get the other party involved. So then I'll respond or call or maybe email the other party and say, this individual has contacted me. I would like to assist you. Please give me a call so that I can talk. Since her and I spoke, I'd like to speak with you.
Yeah, great. And I will be sure to put your contact information so that people can see it. Yeah.
Great. Great.
Thank you so much. I know there's a lot more to talk about, and maybe we could do a follow-up, but I certainly appreciate your expertise and what you do. It's so needed.
Thank you, Susan. I love what I do. I mean, I would never want to be a tax guy. There's a lot of jobs I don't want, but I love what I do. I want to help people move through this process and stay out of court and save the children a lot of grief. But it's been a pleasure to be here. I love your questions, and it's so great to know you.
Thank you, Steven.
Thank you.